is, for our kids to compete. But I know, like you said, you guys are weighing a number of factors. You're getting information from the health department. You're getting information from the governor's office. And then, like you said, once the governor kind of said, hey, we're in a state of emergency in the whole state, in the scheme of things, state basketball becomes very small at that point. As would, really any athletic contest that would have been going on at that moment.
And it was interesting. It was just like I know I've compared it to this, even though it's on a very small scale, significant-wise. But as soon as we did make the decision to cancel the tournament, as many people that were bagging us to cancel it were now mad at us for canceling it. So I did an interview shortly after the decision during the fourth game that day, and no one's looking for a medal or a trophy because of these decisions that are being made. Unfortunately, that's what it came to. And as we've used the phrase in the last month, we're trying to make the best wrong choice going forward.
Yeah, and I know kind of when that came out, I was like, oh man, there's no way this is still going to be around come football season. We're going to be good to go. Everything, we'll have it under control. All those things are going through my head, at that time. But you guys had to almost immediately start saying, okay, now what do we do with spring sports? Because, some of them had started some practices and had maybe a week's worth of practice or maybe 2 weeks in some spots. But, so how is that now that you guys made the decision we're not going forward with basketball after these quarterfinals, and now we got to worry about what are we doing for spring sports and activities?
Well, in our office, and primarily for me, because I'm the baseball, softball, boys golf person. Obviously, spring is a very interactive time for me. When we canceled state basketball, I can't sit here and tell you that I thought that the spring was done for sure. I was like you. I was like, well, we just need to figure out what's going on. Let's regroup. We might be a little delayed here, but we'll get this figured out. And we sat down for that entire week after state basketball and just tried to figure out how can we make spring sports work. And we had a pretty good thought of how we could do it. Unfortunately, and decisions had to be made, and right or wrong, that they're done. So, when school was decided to not reconvene the rest of the semester, that pretty much put the nail in the coffin as far as spring sports were concerned. It was just hard to envision us offering sports without schools being in session at all. And obviously that's still what we're looking for a little bit here in the fall, but we know that there's a plan to return to school once we get going in the fall. So that's why it's a little different now. But when school was canceled for the spring semester, it became pretty evident that we aren't going to be able to offer activities for the young people, and very unfortunate.
Jeremy, Jim Bly here, and we keep hearing a lot of things about the mental aspects of school sports for our youth, for even us adults. My daughter, my wife was working around somebody that tested positive for COVID a few weeks ago, so we all had to get tested and basically quarantined for a week or a little bit more for her. She went back to cross-country practice today and they start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and whenever I picked her up, she was just kind of in bouncy spirits and just, not normal for a junior in high school to be that happy waking up at 6 in the morning and then running in great weather today. But, what's your feelings on that? I mean, is it just a coincidence that she was that happy today, or do you think it was just getting out and being around kids, being around people?
No, I don't think it's a coincidence at all. I'm obviously a huge believer in what mental health in a positive direction does in activities. The University of Wisconsin, you guys may have seen this, did a study since March of high school student athletes and Kansas was part of that, actual Kansas student athletes, and they indicated that the absence of school, the absence of activities, and tons of factors, obviously, the life has been completely different for kids, as it has been for everybody. But the mental aspect of that weighed heavy. Depression was up. The physical scores for kids were way down compared to normal. And I think what your daughter experienced is going to be the nature of every kid going forward. I bet you, at practice today, Coach, those kids, when they found out that football practice was going to start on the 17th, they showed up that day when they found it out with a little more bounce in their step. And we're not trying to say that all of a sudden the virus is over because you're feeling good all of a sudden, but I think it goes a long ways to mentally feel in a good state so you can get better physically as well.
Yeah, you're right. Once, because I was getting a lot of questions from my defensive line group. That's what I coach, and so I'm obviously closest to those guys, on our team, and they would ask me questions, and sometimes I just had to tell them, hey, I don't have any answers, but I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure we have a season, and I'll get information to you guys as I get it from our head coach and our athletic director and from KSHSAA, and we're gonna do the best we can. But once the announcement came out, I got a text from a couple of the guys and just saying, hey, this means we're good to go, right? I said, well, as of right now, then yes. That's kind of changing almost by the hour. I'm sure that for you, this kind of late spring, early summer time, what were you guys doing? How many different contingencies, can you even count them, that you guys were looking at to, hey, how can we have fall sports?
Right. Yeah, well, I'll just paint a little picture. Not everybody's been in our building, but in our boardroom, it's pretty big because we have a 76-person board that meets every now and again. So we hung up actual butcher paper, throughout the room, and we made a list of fall, winter, spring, and we pictured it as, okay, if we can't have a fall season, so fall's gone, don't write anything on this butcher paper here. What do you think we can play in the winter? What do you think we can play in the spring? And does that mean we have to move some things to summer? So we wrote out those type of things. We tried not to put a sport that would overlap, like a football and baseball. You try to stay with it as much as you can because those two share athletes quite a bit. And then we said, okay, fall's good. We've got a good handle on things. Let's act like we're going to have a normal fall. But it's come back to a head, and we can't have winter. Now, what are we moving to the spring? What are we moving to the summer? So obviously, we're still trying to have 3 seasons, if you will. Some of them are just shifting. Some of them are running into each other. And then we kind of came up with a list of, okay, we can kind of have fall. We can have girls golf. We can have tennis, maybe cross country. But those high risk, the indoor volleyball, the football, well, what quote unquote are high risk at the time when we were doing this, we can't have those, but we can have some of the fall. So what can we move from the spring potentially to the fall? So that's when you heard those conversations of, oh, they're going to move baseball and softball to the fall. Boys golf is going to go to the fall. They're going to try to have everything that they can in the fall. So those conversations were obviously had. If a state association wasn't having those conversations, they were not doing a very good job for their people. So we were absolutely having those conversations. And if we did that, what does it look like for the winter, for the spring? If we have no winter, if we have no spring, or is it overlapping? So, you name it, we wrote it out and tried to see what it would feel like. Ultimately, that's obviously not what we've decided. But I'm so glad we had that conversation because it gets you thinking just about the if scenario, because, like you said, we could find out tomorrow something's changed. Who knows what? I have no idea,
Yeah.
But at least we know now that if it does change, we have a pretty good idea what we can offer for kids.
Yeah, so ultimately, after all these conversations are happening inside your offices and different conference calls and things, and I'm sure you guys probably reached out to some other state organizations and said, hey, how are you guys going to handle this? We fast forward and we get to last week where the meeting was on YouTube. I don't know the numbers from that, but you could probably say, I would guess it's probably one of the highest meetings that you guys have ever had, highest viewed meetings that KSHSAA's ever been a part of.
Yeah, I would say that's very true. More often than not, because our board meetings are something you don't want to turn into anyway. But but this one definitely was. I think when we ended the stream, we had over 12,000 unique visitors, but that doesn't even count. I know some people were embedding the feed on their Facebook channels, some news stations, so I don't think we get those numbers. So certainly pretty popular.
But ultimately, after your conversations had happened, we get to that point where, okay, now it's decision time. We have to either, move things back or adjust the fall, cancel the fall. What ultimately landed you guys on the decision to, hey, we're going to, as far as KSHSAA goes, we're going to keep the fall as normal as we can with some safety measures in place and kind of leave it up to the local districts?
Well, I think the executive board who made the decision ultimately felt that obviously how Kansas has handled this situation has been at the local level. About every decision that's been, I shouldn't say every, but the decisions we've seen have been made from, we'll say, the top and then altered for the best decision locally. So I think Kansas has just had that feeling throughout this. So the board had that in mind. They also had I think there was a couple sentiments that were, hey, let's get in what we can. Let's not push things back. We need to try to get as much practice and games as we can before maybe we have to shut down again. So there's a little bit of that. I think there was a little bit of, there's 27 states that have said, hey, we're going to continue on as normal. And so I think there's a little bit of that in play too, as far as some other states or I shouldn't say some, more than half of the states are going after it. And then I think a large part of it was they saw that 70% of our schools are not necessarily altering their start date. If they are, it's maybe by a week. So I know in your area of the state, obviously a large portion of those schools are waiting till September to start school, which that's probably the right decision for them. No one would fault that. I think that was a good sentiment of the board is what's right for Shawnee Mission may not be right for Sharon Springs. So those type of factors come into it. And I think ultimately that's really what persuaded the board to go ahead and just start on August 17th if you can, if it's the right thing to do for your school, or wait if you need to. And I think that's important to know is I think during this entire situation, people have all of a sudden got it in their brain that Kansas has a law that every school has to start on the same date, which that's not true. There's nothing that says that from a Kansas Department of Education statute or state law. And there's also not a statute or law that says you can only start football practice if you're in school. I think, and I know when I was in school, we would have football practice for probably a week before school started. So those are two things definitely for people to keep in mind. I think there was a growing sentiment out there that they just all of a sudden thought that there was law that said you can't practice until you are at school, and usually every school starts on August 24th every year. Well, it's all over the board every year. So a little more than probably you wanted, but that's kind of what I think the board was after.
Have you noticed a difference between the more rural areas, the Hutches, those type of areas, than the Wichita or the Kansas City areas? This past weekend, we had a group over in Kansas. It was not Western Wyandotte County, but it was over that way. that were kind of, I guess you could say, protesting for getting back to school. And then we had another group of teachers